Hello, it's Miss Minetta, and we are going to read our history book all about Massachusetts. And when we read this history book, I want you to think about all the text features that we've learned. So, those are our sidebars, our labels, our captions, and I want you to notice those throughout our reading today. And I'd also like you to think about the different text structures. So, wondering whether this is a telling text structure that will tell you about the main idea and some details? Or is this a sequence story which starts at the beginning of something and goes to the end where the order of events matters? But let's start. The first people. Then in our sidebar, we have the big question. Who were the Wampanoag and how did they live in the land we call Massachusetts? We are not expected to know this. We should be able to answer it at the end of reading this chapter. Then we have our label. Native Americans were the first people to live in Massachusetts. This woman shows how they planted crops long ago. Look at her clothing. Now look at the ground around her. What season do you think it is? Based on her clothing and the green grass, I would say that it's late spring or summer. We all know that in fall and winter in Massachusetts, we're usually wearing long sleeves or jackets. So I don't think she'd be able to wear that outfit in the winter or in the fall, especially in Massachusetts. If we come down here, we can see our timeline. We zoom in. And our timeline tells us a sequence of events. And this timeline starts in 12,000 BCE, 12,000 before Common Era. So from 12,000 BCE to 1,000 BCE, so that's an 11,000 time span, 11,000 year time span. Prehistoric people move into and around the land we call Massachusetts. Now you can see this break in the timeline showing that a lot of time has passed because there's 11,000 years and they don't want to make this timeline really long. So they use this squiggle to show that there's been a lot of years in between these two dates. Then at 1000 BCE to 1600 CE, thousands of Native Americans live in villages across Massachusetts. It is until 1492 that Christopher Columbus reaches the New World. Then in 1497 to 1498, a one-year time span, John Cabot views the coast of Massachusetts from his ships. Now I'm going to zoom back out so you can see the next page, which is the start of our chapter 2. And our timeline continues. So this line that was started at the other page, our timeline on the other page, says from 1500 to 1600. So through 100 years, European fishermen came ashore to dry their catch and trade with Native Americans. During that time, in 1524, Giovanni da Verrazzano explores New England coast. Then, in 1602, Bartholomew Gosnold names Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard. In 1604 to 1605, in 1 year, Samuel de Champlain explores and maps what is now Plymouth. Then in 1614, John Smith maps the coastline and names the region New England. Then in 1616 to 1617, 80% of Native Americans in New England die from diseases brought by Europeans. Now that is an unfortunate event that happened, but very important in our history. So hopefully we'll get to learn a little more about what happened in this time frame. So let me zoom back out to our first page, and it says, become a better reader. Ask questions. Good readers learn to stop and ask questions about what they are reading. You might ask questions about a person, a place, or a place. You will learn that there are different kinds of questions to ask. I know that we can all ask questions throughout this story. So, meet the Wampanoag. Close your eyes for a minute. Go back in time. Go back hundreds of years, before any settlers came across the ocean of Massachusetts. There are no cars or highways. There are no planes flying in the sky. There are no stores or office buildings. All around you are forests of oak, maple, and pine trees. You can smell the ocean close by. What sounds do you hear? You might see a line of smoke rising from the trees. If you follow the smoke, you might find people cooking food over a fire. The people are dressed in soft deerskin and animal furs. What are they? They call themselves the Wampanoag. Wamp-a-nuck. I guess Wampanoag. That name means people of the first light, or people of the dawn. Key ideas. That's the key ideas of this chapter. Native Americans live in the land we call Massachusetts for thousands of years. The Wampanoag were one of several tribes who lived here in the 1600s. The Wampanoag lived life according to the seasons. Then key terms, so that's words we're going to learn about, are legend, longhouse, native, preserve, tribe, and Watu. Then this label for the picture is by the 1600s, there were about 67 villages on the Wampanoag land. Paths led from village to village. In this picture, can you find how the people used the forests and oceans? So I'll zoom out so you can explore this picture and think about that question. Can you find examples of how the people used the forests and the oceans? I see some wood used for bow and arrows. I see some wood used to make structures to dry fish. And then there's fish, which come from the ocean. Did you find anything else? Here's another picture. Oh. The Wampanoag. In the early 1600s, several tribes were living in the land we call Massachusetts. A tribe is a community of families or groups of related families. The tribes had different names and lived in different parts of Massachusetts. However, they had some important things in common. They spoke languages that had a common source called Algonquian. Algonquian. Sorry, I'm not that great at speaking these words. They hunted, fished, and gathered wild berries and plants. They were farmers who grew maize, which is corn, beans, and squash to eat. They made clothing from animal skins and used tools made from stones, shells, and bones. To build homes, they used the materials they found around them. The Wampanoag tribe was one of these tribes. We will focus on their way of life in this chapter. Other tribes may have done things a bit differently. What's in a name? Today, people often call the Wampanoag and other tribes American Indians or Native Americans. Native means born in a place or coming naturally from a place. Americans have lived here for thousands of years. Here's a map. The Native American tribes in 1620. The tribes in Massachusetts were part of a larger nation that spoke the Algonquian language. The Algonquian speaking people lived across the eastern woodlands of North America. Find the Wampanoag lands on the map. What other tribes lived in Massachusetts in the 1600s? Which tribe lived closest to where you live today? Okay. So, here's our map. The Wampanoag is right here. And this is Cape Cod. And we are about here. So that means that we are the Massachusetts tribe. I'll zoom out so you can see this page. And this is Living with the Seasons. Living with the Seasons. The Wampanoag people got everything they needed from nature. There was soil for planting crops, the forest gave them animals to hunt, and wood for building. Clear rivers were full of fish and water birds. The rivers and oceans gave them water for fishing, drinking, cooking, washing, and traveling. Wild plants provided berries, nuts, and healing herbs. This did not mean that life was easy. The people had to work hard to make everything they needed. If you were young, Wampanoag, boy or girl, your life followed the seasons. Let's read more about some of the things you could do in the spring, summer, fall, and winter. Now we have a picture and a label which says Wampanoag life followed the seasons. The people lived according to what they found in spring, summer, fall, and winter. Sidebar, a long history or a text box. The Wampanoag believed they are related to the earliest people who lived here more than 10,000 years ago. We call these early groups prehistoric Indians. Prehistoric means before history was written down. How do we know about prehistoric people? We can learn about them through stories the people passed down. We can also study artifacts they left behind. Archaeologists are scientists who study clues left behind by ancient people. They have found spear points in Boston that are 6,000 to 8,000 years old. Under Back Bay, they have found wooden stakes from fishing weirs. The stakes are 5,000 years old. A fishing weir is a trap made of sticks woven together. People set the trap across the river. Think about our lives today. How do they change with the seasons? Do the foods we eat depend on the seasons? How is this different from or similar to the way Native Americans lived? So think about that. Do we eat food just based on what season it is? Or do we get to eat any food anytime? Now let's think about, this would be a compare and contrast, about how this is different and similar to Native Americans. Take a minute and think about that. I would say some things that are similar is we do eat certain foods depending on the seasons. Mostly, I would say seafood. Most people eat certain seafood that depends on what season you can catch that fish. Or if you have a garden, maybe you have your fresh tomatoes in the summer, while in the winter you go out and buy your tomatoes from the grocery store. Now, this is different from what Native Americans did, because if they couldn't grow it in the winter, they were not eating it. They didn't have storage or they weren't able to get food from across the nation like we can today. I'm sure you guys came up with some great ideas as well on that. Spring and summer by the sea. Now I will zoom out so you can see the whole page. In the spring and summer, you live near the seashore. Your family has a planting ground there. It is important to live near water and good farmland. The year begins when the herring move up the river to lay their eggs. A herring is a small fish. Your family catches so many herring. How will you eat them all? You smoke the extra fish so they will last a long time without spoiling. Your father catches fish and eels from the ocean and rivers. Your mother digs for clams and finds lobster in the surf. Now, this is a label for this picture down here. Part of learning is watching. You watch your father and uncles make eel traps like this one. You see them trim the sticks to make them all the same size. Then they tie them together with reeds from other plants. Someday you will have to make your own eel trap. These men are catching eels in the trap. Judging from the picture, how do you think the trap worked? You can look down here. This is where the trap is. You can see the fish. Or the eel, sorry. Now, this is our page about planting crops. Take a look at this picture. Now I'm going to zoom in. Planting crops. The men get the land ready for planting. Your father and the other men cut down trees. First, they put mud or clay part of the way up the trunks. Then they light a fire around the trunks. The fire cuts through the trunks but stops at the mud. The men scrape away the ashes. Soon the trees fall to the ground. Later, the men will use the fallen trees to make boats or machines. Once the land is clear, your mother plants corn, beans, and squash. Before she puts the seeds in the ground, she puts some of the herring you caught into the soil. The fish will make the soil richer. In another field, your father grows tobacco. Then you have a label for this picture. Older children helped guard the crops. They scare away birds that come to eat the corn. How do you think the people built this platform? Then we have a text box up here, the Three Sisters. Native Americans called their most important crops the Three Sisters. The Three Sisters were corn, beans, and squash. These crops grew together and helped each other in much the same way that family members might. In the spring, women and girls planted corn seeds in little mounds of earth. When the stalks were a few hands tall, they scattered beans and squash seeds around the base. As the bean plants grew taller, the corn stalks supported them. The bean plants had nitrogen, which kept the soil healthy. The large squash leaves spread out on the ground. They covered the soil and kept it moist in the hot weather. The squash also stopped weeds from getting to the other plants. Interesting. Very smart. Okay, so that's all we're going to read today of chapter 2. I think we're on our way to answering our key question of the chapter, which was, who are the Wampanoag and how did they live in the land we call Massachusetts? We will learn more later this week. Thank you for reading with me.